You don't raise a child expecting them to one day become your accuser. You don't spend sleepless nights rocking them through fevers or work double shifts to afford their college tuition only to watch them sit across from you as a stranger, cold-eyed, manipulative, holding out their hand like you owe them something for simply existing. But that's exactly what happened to me. My name is Denise. I'm 62 years old, a widow of 6 years, and the woman who once believed that love, effort, and sacrifice would be enough to create a grateful son. But gratitude is a currency some people never learn to trade, and especially when they think they're entitled to everything you have left. When my husband, Gary, passed away, it was sudden and brutal. A heart attack in his sleep. We didn't get a chance to say goodbye, and I didn't get a chance to prepare for the avalanche of grief and logistics that followed. My world collapsed into paperwork, insurance calls, and endless condolences that felt like echoes in a canyon. The house felt colder without his laugh, the bed impossibly large. But I endured. I survived. I did what I always do. I adjusted. I sold our second car, rented out the lake cabin, downsized to a smaller home in a quieter part of town. And in those adjustments, I made choices, smart ones. I restructured our retirement accounts, invested in low-risk bonds, worked with a financial advisor who had been with us since before the kids were born, and slowly, steadily, I built security not for extravagance, but for peace. My son, Ethan, wasn't happy about it. He and his wife, Jenna, had always lived with an expectation of safety nets. He was ambitious, but often unstable in his professional choices, hopping from startups to side hustles, always one seminar away from becoming the next business mogul. Jenna was the type of woman who treated lifestyle like a full-time job, curated Instagram feeds, expensive skincare routines, and a deep disdain for anything resembling a 9-to-5. I never judged them out loud. I thought maybe they'd find their stride eventually. That's what mothers do, we hope, long past reason. But when Ethan came to me one Friday afternoon, barely 2 months after I had moved into my new place, I should have known something was wrong. He didn't call first, just showed up, his Tesla parked slightly crooked in the driveway, his face pulled tight with practiced concern. "Mom," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, "we need to talk." I offered him coffee. He declined. Instead, he got straight to it. They needed $100,000 urgently for a can't-miss opportunity, a high-yield investment that Jenna's cousin had vetted, something about NFTs and digital assets and legacy positioning. I blinked at the buzzwords, each one emptier than the last. "Ethan," I said, calm but firm, "that's not how I use my money." He smiled tight, rehearsed, almost pitying. "But it's not just your money anymore, is it?" he said. "It's part of the family's future. And I'm your only child. You wouldn't let me drown if you have a lifeboat, right?" The words didn't sting as much as the tone did. Entitled, I see, a stranger speaking through my son's mouth. I told him no. I explained my reasoning, my planning, my caution, my refusal to gamble on something that smelled more like desperation than strategy. He left abruptly. No hug, no goodbye. That night, I stared at my ceiling for hours, questioning everything. Had I failed him? Had I raised someone who couldn't respect boundaries? Or had I simply refused to see the rot because it wore the face of someone I loved? 2 days later, they came back. This time, it was Jenna who led the charge. She brought a thermos of coffee, handed it to me with a smile too wide, too sweet. "Just wanted to apologize," she said, voice syrupy. "We were stressed. We shouldn't have cornered you. I made your favorite hazelnut caramel. Ethan said you used to drink it all the time." I hadn't mentioned that in years. Something in her eyes made my stomach tighten. I took the thermos, thanked her, and watched as she glanced around the living room with curious calculation like she was measuring the space for something. Then she left, and I didn't drink the coffee. Instead, I poured it into a clear glass mug and stared. The smell was off. Not rotten, just wrong. I dipped a spoon in, stirred, noticed a faint shimmer in the liquid, almost oily. That was when my skin prickled, not with fear, with realization. This wasn't just entitlement anymore. This was something else, and I was about to uncover the truth behind it. I didn't sleep that night. Not properly. I paced, I replayed their faces, I googled symptoms of tampered beverages, and somewhere around 3 in the morning, I found myself in the kitchen, staring at that untouched mug under the refrigerator light. That strange, oily sheen was still floating there, swirling faintly like a secret refusing to settle. I dipped a clean spoon again and stirred, watching the liquid catch the light like varnish. That coffee had never smelled like caramel hazelnut. It smelled like sweetened chemical ambition. At 8 a.m. sharp, I packed the mug into a Ziploc bag, sealed it tight, and drove it to the only place I could think of, a private testing lab I remembered from when Gary and I had our well water screened for lead years ago. The receptionist didn't ask many questions, just noted my name, date, and suspected contamination on the form. I paid in cash. Then I waited. The lab said results would take 48 hours, but they called me the next afternoon. Early, too early early for coincidence. "Ma'am," the technician said, careful and slow, "this coffee sample tested positive for zolpidem, among other compounds. It's a sedative, commonly used for sleep, but not in the dose we're seeing. It would cause confusion, blackouts, possibly worse, depending on age or pre-existing conditions." I remember gripping the counter as I leaned against it, trying not to scream. Zolpidem, Ambien, a pill used by people with insomnia. I hadn't taken sleeping pills since the year Gary died. I avoided anything that dulled my mind. I needed clarity, focus, especially when managing finances. But this wasn't an accident. This wasn't Jenna trying to soothe tensions with a thoughtful gesture. This was deliberate, premeditated. I sat down, heart pounding, and just like that, the dots began to connect. The odd timing of Ethan's demand, the scripted apology, the push for coffee instead of conversation, Jenna's wandering eyes as she scanned my home. Was she checking what I might do if I passed out? Was this about access? My computer? My safe? No, it was worse. They weren't trying to convince me. They were trying to incapacitate me. The full horror unraveled as I checked my accounts. Passwords hadn't been changed, no transfers made. But one of my USB drives, the one I kept tucked away with backup account documents, was slightly askew in the desk drawer. I hadn't touched it in weeks. Had they come back while I was asleep? Or were they planning to? I called my lawyer, not just for legal protection, but to start building a paper trail. Everything was logged, documented, timestamped. The sample, the test results, the visit, the coffee. I even wrote a detailed personal statement, signed and notarized, describing the events of the past few days. And then I waited. Because if Jenna and Ethan were bold enough to try drugging me, they were bold enough to try something again. People like that don't stop. They escalate. Sure enough, the next morning, I received a text from Ethan. "Hey Mom, hope you enjoyed the coffee. Can we come by later? I think we should clear the air." I didn't answer. Instead, I forwarded the text to my lawyer. Then I called the police, not to press charges yet, but to establish a wellness check. I needed it on record that I felt unsafe, that there had been suspicious substances involved. The officer was polite but cautious. "If you don't want to make a formal accusation, ma'am, there's only so much we can do right now." That was fine. I wasn't looking for a reaction. I was building a foundation for something bigger. And while they plotted their next move, believing me weak, confused, or just naive enough to fall for a second round, I was preparing to dismantle everything they thought they knew about me. Because they hadn't just tried to manipulate me, they tried to erase my ability to say no. And the next time they came to my door, they would be the ones blindsided. The next few days, I played a role I hadn't worn since my husband's corporate days: calm, cordial, and entirely performative. The kind of poise that unnerves people more than confrontation. I didn't tell them I knew. I didn't rage. I didn't demand. I just stepped into their lie and let them think it was working. Because in their arrogance, they'd show me everything I needed. Ethan and Jenna arrived that Sunday afternoon dressed like peace offerings. He wore that expensive cashmere sweater I'd bought him for his birthday 4 years ago, back when I still thought gifts could repair distance. Jenna had her hair curled soft, her smile radiant and unearned, holding a tray of pastries from the overpriced French bakery downtown. "We wanted to make things right," Ethan said, handing me a box like it absolved him. I welcomed them in with tea freshly brewed, no additives. Jenna eyed it nervously. I offered her the mug with a blank expression. She declined. I noted that. We sat in my living room, them on the couch, me in Gary's old chair, my posture straight, composed, letting them control the conversation. Ethan launched into a performance about regret, misunderstanding, pressure. "You know how things can spiral," he said. "I didn't mean to make you feel cornered. We just believed in the opportunity." Jenna nodded, eyes wide. "We just want to move forward. As a family." I didn't smile. I didn't interrupt. I just let silence do the heavy lifting. After 10 minutes, Ethan mentioned the investment again, almost casually framing it as an open door if I was ever ready to consider. That was his tell. He wasn't sorry. He was still fishing, still assuming I might fold. I leaned forward just enough to make it look like I was softening. "Let me think about it," I said. "I just need to be sure I'm protected." Both their faces lit up like slot machines. Jackpot. Jenna reached into her purse and handed me a thin manila folder. "Actually," she said brightly, "we had our cousin draft something, just for your peace of mind." I took it without opening. My hands didn't even tremble. Inside, I later discovered, was a one-page authorization granting Ethan partial access to my estate account under the guise of joint custodianship. If I had signed it, and if they had gotten that coffee into me just one time, I would have never even known the funds were gone until it was too late. That night, I scanned the document, sent a copy to my attorney, and made another entry in my growing file. I also installed 2 new hidden cameras, one by the front door, the other in my office. I wasn't being paranoid. I was creating evidence. Because this wasn't just betrayal. This was a coordinated effort to rob me under the illusion of love. A few days later, they tried again. This time, Jenna came alone. She brought homemade soup. I pretended to warm to her. I thanked her, let her ramble about stress and babies, and how Ethan never really felt close to his father, and how maybe that's why he acts out with money. She played the concerned wife, positioning herself as a diplomatic bridge between me and my son. I know he comes off strong, she said gently, but he really just wants your approval, and maybe your guidance on how to handle this next chapter. I smiled and told her I'd think about it. The next morning, my home office had been broken into. No signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, but the desk drawer with my USB backup, the same one I'd noticed out of place before, was now empty. They had taken it, or so they thought. In reality, that drive had been switched out 2 days earlier with a decoy. The real one, the one with actual financial data and estate files, was locked in a safety deposit box downtown under a trust-owned LLC that neither of them knew existed. So when they opened the USB, all they found was encrypted junk files and a single PDF labeled, "You shouldn't have underestimated me." I never got confirmation they saw it, but Ethan stopped texting for 2 full days. When he finally reached out, his message was icy. "You've made things difficult for no reason. We'll talk when you're ready to act like family again." I stared at that message for a long time, then deleted it without reply. Family? You don't drug family. You don't forge signatures, steal documents, and scheme behind someone's back while pretending to love them. No, what they wanted wasn't family, it was access. And now that they couldn't get it, the mask was slipping, which meant they get desperate. And desperation always reveals more than deception ever could. The illusion of control was what Ethan and Jenna thrived on: subtle manipulations, little tests of boundary, moments of rehearsed charm packaged as familial warmth. But what neither of them realized was that I had spent over 30 years navigating corporate warfare alongside my late husband. I knew how to read liars. I knew how to file things that could crush people without making a sound. And most of all, I knew how to wait to let my silence become strategy and my distance become leverage. I didn't confront them directly after the break-in. I didn't even change the locks. That would have confirmed I knew. Instead, I reinforced my alarm system and tied the security feed directly into a cloud archive only I could access. My attorney helped me draft a suspicious activity report and file it quietly with the local precinct. We also submitted a copy to my bank, flagging the incident as a preemptive measure against any potential authorization fraud. At the same time, I began what I called Operation Icebox. I froze access to everything. I restructured my trusts, moving assets under layered ownership umbrellas. I revoked old power of attorney designations and replaced them with a legal proxy from the firm that had handled my husband's estate. I notified my brokerage to require in-person verification for any large withdrawals. Even my safe was moved from the house and replaced with a decoy containing a few vintage coins and a letter addressed to Ethan. "If you found this, then you've gone too far." And I know, I wasn't just pulling away. I was building fortresses where bridges once stood. In the weeks that followed, the cracks between Ethan and Jenna began to show. Small things first: public arguments on their shared social media page, vague quotes posted on her Instagram stories about people pretending to love you and loyalty only going one way. Then came the phone calls to extended family members, carefully crafted to paint me as paranoid, withholding, even emotionally unstable. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me privately. "I don't know what they told you, Denise, but something feels off. Jenna was asking if you were on medication, said you've been forgetful." That was the final confirmation I needed. They weren't just trying to steal from me, they were trying to discredit me, quietly erode my mental image, so that if something ever went public, if they tried to present documents or transfers, I'd look like the confused, irrational mother who'd simply signed things and forgotten. It was textbook, and it was vicious. So I began planting seeds of my own. I requested a full psychiatric evaluation from a licensed specialist. Voluntary, thorough, and documented. I passed with flying colors, and the report went straight to my lawyer's office. I had my primary physician review and notarize a complete medical evaluation showing excellent cognitive function. Another copy went into the archive. Then I wrote a personal letter to my 3 closest friends, women I'd known for decades, women who had stood beside me during Gary's death, women whose opinions couldn't be shaken by gossip. I told them everything, not just the coffee, not just the break-in, but the entire slow burn betrayal that had started the day Ethan stopped treating me like his mother and started treating me like a bank vault. They were horrified, but more importantly, they were ready. Each one agreed to provide personal affidavits, should it ever be required, attesting to my clarity, stability, and the very real pattern of manipulation I had endured. I didn't want to take it that far, but I would be ready if I had to, because people like Ethan and Jenna don't back down. They press harder, and sure enough, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Jenna appeared at my door again. No pastries this time, no coffee, just a file folder and a smile that didn't touch her eyes. I thought maybe we could talk, she said, sweet and brittle. I let her in. She sat, opened the folder. Inside was a draft of a living inheritance agreement, a proposal to co-manage my assets in exchange for them providing elder support and long-term housing solutions. I stared at the page in silence. Just in case, she added softly, "We don't want you to ever feel alone." I met her eyes. "I never feel alone," I said, "especially not with wolves circling." She blinked once, then she smiled again and slid the paper forward. "You don't have to decide today, just think about it." And I did. I thought about it all night, not because I was considering it, but because it confirmed what I already suspected. They were laying legal groundwork to declare me unfit to gain conservatorship. They'll lock down my estate before I ever had a chance to stop them. They hadn't just tried to drug me, they were now preparing to bury me alive in paperwork. But what they didn't know, what they could never understand, was that I had already set a plan in motion that would blow the foundation right out from under them. Because there's one thing schemers always forget: the person you're targeting might already be 10 moves ahead. I knew I couldn't rely on emotional appeals. That part of motherhood, the gentle negotiations, the pleading for understanding, was long behind me. Ethan and Jenna had shown me, clearly and without remorse, that the only language they understood was consequence. But I also knew that vengeance for its own sake wouldn't protect me. I needed something cleaner, sharper, irrefutable, so I chose strategy over spectacle. I began with Jenna. On the surface, she was polished. The kind of woman who curated her life like a gallery exhibit, every outfit intentional, every post online a carefully filtered illusion of success. But I knew people like her never operated alone. If she was bold enough to hand me drugged coffee and draft legal guardianship papers, she wasn't just acting on impulse. She was receiving advice, coaching. I hired a private investigator. It wasn't the first time I'd worked with one Gary, and I had once used the same man when one of our employees tried to siphon client lists after quitting. Discreet, thorough, and expensive. Worth every penny. Within a week, he returned with a digital folder thick with receipts. The woman Jenna called her cousin wasn't related at all. She was a former classmate from a failed venture capital firm that had been blacklisted after a misappropriation scandal. The investment Ethan tried to sell me wasn't just unstable, it was non-existent. It had a website, yes, and a few glossy brochures, but the company's registration traced to a P.O. box in Nevada and a legal firm known for laundering offshore funds. And the cherry on top? Emails, recovered from a shared cloud drive, likely forgotten. Messages between Jenna and the cousin, where Jenna described me as a ripe asset waiting to be unlocked. Another line: "She's still sharp, but if we can get her tired enough, she won't question paperwork." I read those words in my kitchen, fists clenched, the breath knocked out of me, not from surprise, but from confirmation. I hadn't imagined the malice. I hadn't overreacted. They had planned this like a heist, and now I had their blueprints. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, who nearly choked when he saw the email trail. "This is gold," he said. "You've got them." "No," I replied. "I'm not looking to destroy them." He paused. "Then what are you looking for?" "Clarity," I said. "And witnesses." Because now it was time for the part they never saw coming: exposure. I knew Jenna had a network, a curated group of fellow image keepers, moms and entrepreneurs who followed her like she was the second coming of Martha Stewart. If even half of them saw what I had uncovered, the cracks in her reputation would be irreversible. But I didn't want it to come from me. I wanted the truth to land like a match tossed into dry grass. I wanted it to spread. So I made a call to Olivia Mayer. She ran the local community newsletter, a former journalist turned suburban publisher. We'd worked together years ago on a neighborhood preservation campaign. She owed me a favor. I gave her the documents. She read them in silence. "I can't publish this as is," she said carefully. "Too close to defamation." "I don't need you to," I said. "Just circulate it among your network. Off record, quietly. Mothers talk." She nodded once. "Consider it done." Within 72 hours, whispers became murmurs. Jenna's branding workshop at the local library was suddenly postponed. A speaking engagement on ethical online entrepreneurship was quietly pulled from the calendar. And most delicious of all, 3 women who had been planning a business partnership with her backed out, citing concerns about integrity. Ethan wasn't spared either. An anonymous tip, carefully phrased, with source material included, was sent to the HR department at his current employer. Nothing illegal, just enough truth to justify a deeper look. His access to financial data was immediately suspended. His direct supervisor placed him on review. I never heard the full fallout, but someone I knew on the inside said, "He's radioactive, and he knows it." And that's when the phone calls started. First from Jenna. "You vindictive old woman. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I didn't respond. Then Ethan, this is your fault. You're tearing this family apart. I listened, calm, cold. You did that, I said. The moment you decided my money was worth more than my trust. The line went dead. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. It felt like a funeral, not for myself, but for the illusion that I still had a son who loved me. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply sat in the quiet and let the silence bury whatever hope I still carried. Because they hadn't just tried to steal from me. They'd tried to turn me into the villain of my own life. But now the story was mine again. And I was just getting started. The morning I received the certified letter, I already knew what it would contain. Ethan and Jenna had finally done what people like them always do when manipulation and charm fall flat. They'd gone legal. It was a formal notice requesting reconsideration of familial inheritance, citing my increased emotional volatility and ongoing refusal to engage in estate transparency, accompanied by a separate draft petition for conservatorship. It was everything I'd expected, dressed in pseudo-concern and self-serving language. But I wasn't rattled, not even a little. This was the crescendo of their performance, the final act of control. What they didn't know was that the audience had changed. I wasn't the one they had to convince anymore. They'd walked into a court system that wasn't built on smiles and tone. It ran on facts, timelines, and evidence, all of which I had meticulously built for weeks. Within the hour, my attorney filed a formal counteraction, a request for dismissal with supporting documentation. Included were Jenna's own words, emails, text messages, financial tracking documents connecting their investment scheme to known fraud operations, the toxicology report from the drugged coffee, and sworn affidavits from friends and neighbors confirming my mental competence and the suspicious behavior observed around my home. I attached the psychiatric and physical evaluations as final proof. No gaps, no ambiguity, just cold, hard truths. But that wasn't all. I wanted them exposed not only legally, but socially, publicly, undeniably. So I took the final step of unsealing an asset I had protected for decades. The Keene Family Foundation, founded by Gary and me long before Ethan had ever learned to tie his shoes. The foundation had quietly supported dozens of local programs, from community gardens to literacy drives and scholarship funds. Over the years, we'd kept our involvement private, channeling money through discreet trusts. Ethan never knew it existed. But now, I moved it into the spotlight. With my lawyer's help, I filed an amendment to make the Foundation's mission statement public again under one condition. No blood relative of mine would ever be allowed on its board, its administration, or its list of beneficiaries. The clause was ironclad, irreversible, and included a statement of intent signed and witnessed. The Foundation would now provide annual scholarships for women over 50 returning to college after domestic or financial trauma. Its name would carry on, not with the weight of scandal and greed, but with the intention and dignity Gary and I had built it with. And on the day the Foundation's relaunch was announced in a local newspaper, I mailed Ethan and Jenna a copy. No note, just the clipping, folded neatly, with the final clause highlighted. By unanimous vote of the board, direct descendants of the founders shall be barred from financial or administrative involvement in perpetuity. That evening, Jenna arrived at my front porch. No makeup, no charm, just fury masked as desperation. "You ruined us," she said, her voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. I said nothing. She stepped forward. "You didn't have to go this far. We're your family." That word again. That poisoned, hollow word. "No," I replied softly. "You were passengers. I offered you seats at my table. You tried to steal the house." Her face twisted. "You think anyone will care about some dusty foundation and your little legacy?" I smiled. Calm, final. "They already do. And now your names will never be attached to anything with honor in this town again." She turned to leave. And then, just as she reached the bottom step, she said, "You're going to die alone." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her for what she truly was. A woman so consumed by entitlement, she couldn't imagine a world where love wasn't transactional. "No," I said. "I'm going to die free. And that scares you more than anything." She didn't answer. She walked away. And as her figure disappeared down the street, I felt something shift, not in fear or triumph, but in release. I had won, not by tearing them apart, but by removing myself from their story and writing my own with pen and steel. They had tried to rob me of my future. Instead, I had robbed them of their illusions. And soon, the rest of the world would know it too. There is a particular kind of silence that follows victory, not loud or triumphant, but cold and deliberate. A silence that doesn't seek applause, because the work is done and the ruins speak for themselves. That was the silence I sat in, on a Monday morning, sipping tea while an alert pinged on my phone. A notification from the local civil court records. The conservatorship petition filed by Ethan Keene and Jenna Carter Keene has been formally dismissed due to insufficient grounds and evidence of malicious intent. Malicious intent. There it was in black and white, in legal ink. They hadn't just lost. They had been documented, named as schemers, manipulative, self-serving. A public censure more humiliating than any confrontation. This wasn't just a failed grab for power. It was a mark, and marks like that follow people. I didn't call them, didn't gloat. I let the silence do its work. Let it stretch across their lives like frost. Jenna's influencer brand went quiet. No posts, no new clients. The rumor mill had long since turned from whispers to confirmation. A few of her sponsors pulled out, then the rest followed. The coffee shop she'd wanted to open with her branding partner never got past permitting. Her applications for community grant funding were denied, not because I interfered, but because character catches up. Ethan lost his job 3 weeks later. His supervisor filed a formal complaint citing conflicts of trust and multiple third-party reports of coercive financial behavior. And when he tried to apply for another position in a rival firm, my investigator, now fully employed by my legal team, discovered that his name had been quietly blacklisted in every hiring conversation. A network I had once helped build for him in his early 20s, the same one he'd forgotten about when he started treating me like a burden, was now holding him accountable in silence. No accusations, no fireworks, just doors closing, one by one. But revenge doesn't stop at reputation. It unfolds in legacy. So I did one more thing. I held a gathering, not a press event, not a party. A gathering of women, over 24 of them. Some I had met at the Women's Center. Some who had written to me after my foundation relaunch. Some who had seen their own children turn into predators in suits and silk. All of them had one thing in common. They thought they were alone. Until now. We met at the Hall Gary, and I once used for holiday charity events. I stood at the front of the room and told them my story, in full, from the first conversation about the $100,000 to the test results of that coffee Jenna gave me. And when I finished, I told them this. They tried to erase me, but I gave them something permanent instead, a line they cannot cross, a door they'll never open again. And if you've been where I've been, I want you to know this. You are not crazy. You are not selfish. You are not obligated to fund the destruction of your own peace. We cried, we laughed, we signed pledges symbolic but powerful, declaring that none of us would let guilt keep us tethered to people who weaponized family ties. A journalist friend of mine, who'd been in the back corner of the room with permission, wrote a feature article that week. It wasn't about me by name. It didn't mention Ethan or Jenna. But it told the story of a woman who built walls after being attacked from within, and how those walls protected not just herself but dozens of others. It ran in a regional magazine, and people read it. Strangers began sending letters to my foundation, donations, volunteer offers, notes that said, "Thank you for speaking what I was too afraid to say." And through it all, I stayed quiet. Because revenge isn't always fire. Sometimes it's structure. Sometimes it's a calm hand rearranging the chessboard until the other player realizes they've already lost. And in this case, they lost everything they hadn't even earned yet. They lost access. They lost legacy. They lost me. And worse than that, they lost the version of me they believed they could control. Revenge, I learned, doesn't always leave ashes. Sometimes it leaves blueprints for a life where betrayal no longer has power, where legacy is reshaped by the hands that built it, not stolen by the mouths that demanded it. That final part came not with police sirens or courtroom drama, but with quiet decisions. Permanent ones. I changed my will. Again. This time, I did it with ceremonial precision, not out of bitterness, but clarity. Ethan's name was not simply omitted, it was formally disinherited. A clause was added, for reasons personal, legal, and documented. My son shall receive no part of this estate, its holdings, nor access to any legal claim or challenge upon its assets. I also added Jenna's name, under a separate condition, barred from acting as proxy, representative, or indirect beneficiary of my estate under any circumstance. I didn't stop there. I established a charitable scholarship in Gary's name for young men and women raised by single mothers pursuing law or social work. It came with a mentorship program, full tuition for 4 students each year, plus monthly stipends. And every application included one required essay prompt. What does it mean to honor the person who gave you everything? It wasn't just financial redirection. It was poetic, because now, every dollar that could have gone to Ethan and Jenna would go to someone who understood what respect really looked like. And then Then I did the hardest thing. I blocked their numbers on my phone, my email, and even the old emergency contact form I had once kept at the hospital just in case. I removed Ethan from my medical directives, replaced him with my attorney and my best friend of 20 years, a woman who had never once asked me for money, only truth. The last string I severed came in the form of a family photo, one taken 10 years ago, back when smiles still felt real. I didn't burn it. I simply put it away, in a box, on a high shelf, not to erase the past, but to honor the moment I stopped pretending it still lived. Weeks passed, then a month, and I woke up one morning to find a card on my doorstep. No name, just elegant handwriting. Inside, it read, "She's trying to leave him." She found the emails too. I think she's scared, but she says thank you for not giving up. She said your silence told her more than your words ever could. A friend. There was no return address, no signature, but I didn't need one. I knew Jenna, for all her scheming, had begun to unravel the same trap she'd helped set. Maybe she hadn't realized how far Ethan would go. Maybe she'd finally found the edge of what she was willing to accept. Or maybe she had simply seen the writing on the wall and knew there was no future in a house built on fraud and resentment. But I wasn't waiting for redemption. I wasn't holding space for reconciliation. I had spent too many years carrying the weight of everyone else's choices. This time, I carried only my own. I started traveling again, not far at first, just small road trips, a bed and breakfast by the coast, a cabin tucked near a vineyard, places I had once dreamed of visiting, but put off because someone always needed me more. Now I needed me. I read books without interruption, ate alone without apology. I watched sunsets from porches that didn't belong to anyone but myself. And slowly, I began to feel something return. Not innocence, not trust, but selfhood. The part of me that wasn't a mother or a widow or a target. The part that was just Denise, whole, sovereign, free. And when I closed my eyes at night, I no longer imagined confrontations or courtroom speeches or poetic justice. I imagined peace, because in the end, revenge didn't taste like victory. It tasted like silence, the good kind. The kind where nothing was owed, nothing was pending, and no one was at the door pretending they loved you just enough to ruin you. I didn't need them to pay any more. They had already lost something far more valuable than money. They lost access to my life, to my love, to the woman who once would have done anything for them, and now would do everything to protect herself from them. The strange thing about surviving betrayal is that it doesn't leave you with fire, it leaves you with space, not emptiness. Room. And in that room, slowly, carefully, painfully, you start building again. Not the old life. Not the life you once fought to maintain, but a new one, quiet, deliberate, and unapologetically yours. I moved out of my house, not because I was running, not because they had tainted it, but because it no longer represented who I was. That home was built on compromise, on shared decisions, on the illusion that family meant security, and while I had once believed that walls could protect me, I now knew better. What protected me was distance, clarity, and the unshakable knowing that I was no longer waiting for anyone to change. The new place was smaller, brighter, a one-story cottage on the edge of town with ivy curling up the back porch and hardwood floors that creaked just enough to feel alive. The backyard opened into a wild patch of trees. No fences, no gates. Just open land and the occasional deer drifting through like ghosts. I planted a small herb garden. Rosemary, thyme, mint. Watching something grow under my care again, something that didn't demand more than I had to give, was healing in ways I hadn't expected. I volunteered more, too. Once a week, I led financial literacy workshops at the women's shelter. Most of them were younger single mothers, women clawing their way out of abusive relationships, some who had never seen a bank statement with their own name on it. I didn't lecture. I shared. I told them what no one ever told me, that sometimes the people closest to you will use your love like a tool, and that protecting your peace is not cruelty, it's clarity. One woman, her name was Keisha, pulled me aside after class. My ex used to say I was crazy when I asked about money, she whispered. Said I didn't need to know, that it was all being taken care of. She paused. Your story, it's not the same, but it made me feel less stupid. I squeezed her hand. You're not stupid. You're waking up. And in that moment, I saw what my story had become, not a cautionary tale, not a secret shame, but a torch, lit from ashes, but burning clean. I heard from Ethan only once more. A letter, handwritten, no return address, no apology, just 3 sentences. You were never as innocent as you pretended to be. You manipulated everything. I see that now. I read it. Then I folded it. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply placed it inside a small wooden box in the top drawer of my desk, a box labeled, "Would I Survived?" That box held the toxicology report, the copy of the conservatorship petition, the forged legal papers, photos of my desk drawer after the break-in. It also held the very first drawing Ethan had ever made for me in kindergarten, a crooked heart with mommy written in backwards letters, because both of those truths existed. The son who once loved me, and the man who tried to ruin me. I didn't need to erase one to believe the other. That, I realized, was the final stage of freedom, not forgetting, not forgiving, but understanding that I could carry the full weight of my story and still stand tall beneath it. Because in the end, I had protected something far more important than money, reputation, or even legacy. I had protected myself. And now, at 63, with silver in my hair and silence in my home, I finally felt what all those years had promised but never quite delivered. I felt safe. People often imagine that peace arrives with fanfare, a swelling crescendo of justice, a cinematic moment where the world claps and the villains fall at your feet. But real peace, the kind that lingers, the kind that settles deep in your bones, arrives differently, quietly, with no witness, no finish line, just you and the life you finally allowed yourself to live without compromise. For me, it came one Sunday morning. The sun was cutting through the trees in golden ribbons, pouring into the cottage like honey. I was barefoot in the kitchen, baking scones from a recipe my mother taught me when I was 12. No one was coming over. There were no guests, no grandchildren, no family brunch waiting to implode with tension. There was just the smell of lemon zest, the sound of birds outside my window, and the warmth of a home that answered to no one but me. I sat with my tea on the back porch and watched the wind move through the trees like breath. That morning, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to brace myself. I didn't wonder what Ethan might be plotting, or whether Jenna had found another angle. I didn't rehearse what I would say if they appeared again. They no longer lived rent-free in my mind. The space they'd once occupied had grown over, like vines reclaiming the ruins of an old building, still visible, still there, but no longer dangerous. And I felt proud, not for surviving them, but for rebuilding without bitterness, for not letting their betrayal define me, for not becoming hardened in the face of it all. Because revenge is never really about destruction. The most powerful kind of revenge is redirection, turning away so completely that those who hurt you have no map, no access, no relevance in the world you create afterward. I didn't need to post about it. I didn't need to parade my healing. I just lived it. I joined a book club, traveled to Oregon to visit a lavender farm I'd seen once in a magazine 20 years ago. I reconnected with an old college friend and started painting again, badly, but joyfully. My nights were quiet, my laughter real, my meals slow and satisfying. There were still moments of grief, of wondering what could have been, of remembering the little boy who used to fall asleep in my lap. But I had learned to carry those memories like stones in my pocket. Not too heavy, not thrown away, just present. Just real. The truth is, some people will never come back. Some sons stop being sons long before you're willing to admit it. But that doesn't mean you failed them. Sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones you raise with love they learn to weaponize. And the bravest thing you can do is withdraw your permission to be manipulated, to be guilted, to be used under the name of family. I had done that. And now I was free. I stood that afternoon in the middle of my living room, barefoot, holding a warm mug of tea, and I whispered aloud, not for anyone else, just for me. This is what it feels like to choose yourself. And that's what I leave you with, not a tale of punishment, but of clarity. Not a scream of victory, but a whisper of reclamation. Because at the end of it all, I didn't just get justice. I got myself back. And that, above anything they ever tried to take, was the real inheritance.